This came onto my radar also. I really been thinking about it because a couple of weeks ago, we were walking back and ran into some neighbors, and these neighbors had just come from a party of a young graduate, I believe graduating college, quite an accomplished young woman, and she was a singer as well. And I believe she had sung at this party. It was like her own party, and she had sung. And so I said, "Oh, how was it?" And they said it was good, but she was holding back. And it's so interesting. These guys weren't singers, but it's so interesting how you can always tell when a singer is holding back. Now, early on in my days, I had gone, abroad and had been studying music and had been away from my family for an extended amount of time, just working on music. And I remember I came back and I was in some scenario where I was singing in a very informal scenario. And I had a loved one who was close to me say, like, "Yeah, but you're holding back, right? You're not really letting go all the way." And I was like, "What?" I really took offense to it, to be honest with you. But I think they were actually right. Looking back, I can see that. But the truth is, many times it's a psychological holding back. And it can be automatic. It can be something that we really can't just tell ourselves, like, "Hey, quit holding back," and then suddenly you're not holding back. It's something that's coming from a deeper place in us, and it's something that you have to really work on, in my opinion. So I'm going to give you my thoughts on this after working with many singers and after working with myself on this very concept. But I'm going to say it's one of the biggest things that I see in young singers. They have an incredible voice, and maybe when they're in their shower or they're practicing, they don't hold back. But there's something that happens to them when they get into a performance scenario and they're in front of other people. And suddenly it's like half a voice is there. Okay, this has happened to me so many times. Sometimes all of your voice. I've seen that happen to singers where literally they lose all their voice. And if you're not a singer and you're not, getting up trying to perform yourself, you don't really understand. It's like just sing. But the voice is so funny that way. And you can get up there to perform and suddenly you just lose the breath. You lose the power. Your voice, your very voice itself just disappears. And in many other instances, it sort of comes out very thin. That's the word I've often used. It's just thin. Now, some of that can be technically explained as breath sport, right? That there's an anxiety that comes over. That anxiety makes the singer who normally breathes pretty deep, has pretty good breath work just naturally, because many people often do just very naturally know how to sing, know exactly the right amount of breath to take in. But suddenly when they're up in front of an audience and they're dealing with self-consciousness and anxiety, the breath work becomes very shallow. And then that, as a result, makes the voice very thin or sometimes not there at all. So in many instances, we do combat that by talking through technique and getting very conscious of the breath. And that's one of the things I would advise a singer to do. If they get up there in front of the audience and they suddenly find that they have this half a voice, 50% of their voice, or no voice at all, one of the first things to do is become conscious of their breath, right? In many instances, this is a deep diaphragmatic breathing. So the hands would go on the belly would expand, and the singer would sort of notice, like, am I breathing in all the way? Now, for some singers, when they're in front of an audience, that's too much. And so this is where time and experience and practice and vigilance can get a singer to the level where they can think of that while being on stage, right? Because many singers are overwhelmed, even in these little opportunities. Let's say karaoke. Okay, I didn't even talk about how great karaoke can be. How I've always taken the opportunity to do karaoke whenever possible. And if you're somebody who is super shy, you can get one of those amazing, like, Asian karaoke style rooms. At least in the big cities you can. where you rent a room and you're just there with your friends. And these are a great way to start to work on this, because that's what you do. You get up there and you feel these effects coming at you. And the first thing you do is to try to become conscious of your breath, taking these deeper breaths in the middle of still being able to sing the lyrics and not lose your place, and, not be too overwhelmed by the experience, which is more so what happens. And this is my hypothesis of what's happening on more of a technical, educational standpoint. Maybe education's not the right way, but steering clear of the psychological, emotional aspects, let's say. There is something going on with your brain, and that is that part of it is being siphoned off, thinking about and being aware of the other people listening to you. That isn't there when you're by yourself. It's not even a drive to be there by yourself. You might wonder, oh, how do I sound or whatever, but it's not occupying your computational skills or your computational areas the way that, being in front of even one person. It's really funny because you want to downplay it and just be like, oh, who cares unless you're in front of a big audience. But it's not that way. And maybe this is where there is a psychological component to how much of you starts thinking about what the other person or the other people, or the room of people, or whatever, whoever you're in front of, your audience, or even a video, and who's going to later see it. How much of your brain is now going to thinking about that versus being fully present and in your body singing the song? That directly affects your performance. And it affects your ability to think about more than one thing at a time. Right? So you're thinking about the lyrics, you're thinking about your tone, you're thinking about where you're holding the microphone, and now you're realizing, oh, I'm not getting enough breath. So now I'm going to focus in on my breath. Another place to go is my posture, right? Sometimes just from a purely technical standpoint, the voice is being held back because of the tension in the body, okay? Ideally, you're completely comfortable when you're singing. You're completely relaxed. Singing is a full body experience. Your bones, your entire body are conduits of this sound and generating power into your voice. Okay. And then that doesn't even get into the idea that, earlier, like 100 years ago, vocal instructors were much more tuned into the soul and the etheric and beyond just your physical body, right? It wasn't such a materialist viewpoint, 3D at that point, that it's only your bones. It was also the power and the force from your soul or your essence, right? That actually was dealt with. That actually was, factored in when you were working on your technique. So in reality, the funny thing is, many people would say that were from that time period would look on many singers now and feel like we're all singing with half a voice. That was in this book, Verbeck. I'll have to reference that book. I'm not sure that it's right in front of me here. Actually, let me go see if I can get it. But it's a German or Austrian name, which is why I'm having a hard time remembering it. Verbeck, and she was actually an associate of Rudolf Steiner, and she would speak about, like, even in her day, seeing a decline because of the sort of the age of rationalism coming in and all the materialism, and that many people were already singing with half their voice because their soul wasn't engaged with it, that they were only considering the technique of the physical body, and they were no longer factoring in a much grander idea, something that would even be difficult for us to speak about because we don't think the way that they thought back then. I've spoken about this idea before too, just that we're been so indoctrinated in materialism, and that the body is just this sort of mechanical thing and that's all we are. And so many people are disconnected from the idea of their soul or their spirit. The idea of the fourth or the fifth or the sixth dimension are not real to them, but the truth is that's just a mindset, right? It very much doesn't make those dimensions not real. And there's a lot of evidence that singers over 100 years, it's more than 100 years now, I would say maybe like late 1800s, early 1900s is when this particular singer was talking about there being a massive change in how people were even singing, because they were no longer thinking of these realms as being real. They were relegated to just an idea or a fantasy as opposed to being a very real realm, and that their own soul and their own spirit was sort of being squeezed out of the occasion of the voice. The voice is such a window to who we are, and it's the sound itself. When you get into the quantum physics of it, it's such an incredible magical thing that I've spoken often of the idea that it's a portal to another dimension. So it makes sense that our voice could be a connection and a bridge to the higher aspects of ourselves, the finer vibrating parts of ourselves. So that's not to get off a little bit, that's a little bit of a tangent